Like if you feel like you need to over-exaggerate or lie on your paperwork, maybe that's a signal that you're not reflecting enough on the experiences you already have, or that you could potentially join or do something more that would help advance you more in your field. Hello everyone, welcome to the Franny Pack. If you are new to my channel, my name is Francesca. I am delighted to have you here, and hopefully you learn a couple of things about your resume, the do's and don'ts. This is very general and generic because resumes are known to be very diverse. It depends on what field you're in. We're starting to see the resume take on new forms, and I'm not gonna really delve into social media types of resume profiles and websites and platforms because sometimes there's so much more than just a resume site or a job finding site. That could be its own individual video all on its own. So as some of you may know, I worked as a career coach and we learned a lot of the generics about resume building. And to be honest, most of the students I saw were engineering and computer science, which is totally not my field. I'm in the helping services profession, and our requirements are very different. So when I say this is a lot of generic advice, it really is generic advice, but it might be advice that you're not actually doing with your resume. Also, I have been getting some feedback from different employers as I've been applying to jobs and whatnot about specifically the speech language pathology resume, and there's still variation in that as well, of course, because our field is so diverse, but also just because different employers want to see different types of things. So that is really what is going to be very important, is that you learn how to recognize what the employer is looking for and tailor your resume for each individual job you're applying to or types of jobs that you're applying to. Also, I want to preface before we get into more details of the resume, job applications are a holistic process. It involves your resume, usually a cover letter, interview processes. They judge you based on how fast you respond to emails and how your etiquette is when you're responding. Are you using emojis? Are you sending from your phone? All of these things employers really do take into account. They sometimes even look at your social media profiles. I shouldn't even say sometimes. That's becoming more of a practice among employers, especially now with everything being virtual, basically, and with the pandemic that has just occurred. Employers now more than ever are looking at social media profiles. Your LinkedIn is a social media profile, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So just be aware and responsible when you're using social media and you're looking for a job or an internship, because not only your friends are seeing that, the entire world can see that. Even if you have it on private, they can still see your bios and your picture for your profile. So you just want to make sure all of that is appropriate if your intention is to land a job. Resumes are often confused with CVs, which are typically used in research. CVs go way more in depth than a resume does, and a resume is typically about a page or two, whereas CV is more than 2 pages. I personally use a CV type format because I am involved in research. I have been for many years now, and for me that is just what gets my experience across the best. But I always make sure to ask employers first if they prefer that I send in a CV versus a resume, if they have a preference. Sometimes they don't have a preference, and sometimes they're like, no, I just want a resume, keep it to 1 page. So that's really important. Also, since I had worked with a lot of engineering students and computer science students in the past, a lot of times when they go to upload their resume onto a portal, there is an AI system that scans the entire document, looks for keywords, looks for formatting, and sometimes their resume will get rejected if it's more than 1 page long. just because it didn't fit that criteria. So always be aware of what the requirements and the specifications are for all of the different types of documents you're supposed to be uploading for the job application, just because you don't want to run the risk of either looking bad to the employer and saying basically to the employer that you didn't care enough to look through all of this information and make sure you stuck to it, or if it's going through a computer analyzation system, you don't want it to be rejected just because of a stupid mistake, because you were confused or didn't look carefully enough. It's really important. Other formatting things about the resume that you should be aware of, there is some wiggle room, especially as you start to change your experiences and tailor your resume for each job, or you just finished a certain experience and you want to add it on to your resume. Font should be something very simple. I love Times New Roman. It's the smallest legible font that is there. A lot of people use Arial, and there's a couple other fonts I've seen, but you want it to be non-script. You want it to be something that is clear and concise and easy to read for the viewer, for whoever is reviewing your paperwork. Size-wise, it should range from 10.5 up to 12, and that is for all of the text in the document itself. Your heading, as far as your name and your contact, can be a little different. So we usually say that your name should be the first thing the employer sees, and that is okay to be between a size 14 to 16 sized font, and then your contact information should be right under there, and you can add in your email address, your phone number, if you have a really strong LinkedIn profile and you want to include that URL, or if you have an outside website that you work on and you want to include that URL. It's becoming less of a common practice to include your physical address, and it can also create a type of bias for employers. Let's say you plan on working in California and currently you live in New York. You don't necessarily want to put your New York address because they're going to look at that and automatically questions are going to start to arise. So sometimes in those cases, if you know you're going to be moving or whatever, it's okay to just leave off your address, and you might actually really need that extra space anyways. Margins all around the document, you can go down to 1/2 inch and up to 1 full inch all around. This is easier to do in Microsoft Office than it is in Google Documents. I think I've only had one student figure it out, and it was not easy. I just always download the document if I'm using Google Docs, work on it in Microsoft Office, and then re-upload it or just save it as a PDF. But as far as colors, this is going to vary depending on your setting. So for speech language pathologists, you really want to keep it simple. Black, white, and I have seen some speech language pathologists use like dark blue and like navy and stuff. I really don't suggest doing that. I would just say like stick to black and white. But you could ask your employer if like you are really digging the colors that you put into your resume. You can ask them, do you have any specifications for a resume, colors, etc.? See what they say. You can ask it more vague to see what their response is. If you're in a different type of field like digital design, graphic design, creative arts, I've seen a couple of performance resumes even, because I have my research CV, then I have some of my more standard resume type work related resume documents. Then I have my performance resumes, which are very different in types of experience that I have on there. I have some color on those, I have a picture, but as far as resumes and CVs for most fields, you will not have a picture on there. You will not have little graphic designs. It's going to be pretty standard and boring, but the point of having and submitting a resume or a CV is to show that to the employer you have the experience or what it takes to learn the job and do it well. as far as design and wanting to stand out, you should really be creating the descriptions of each of your experiences in a way that stands out because you are so qualified or you're willing to learn or have some experience within that field. Continuing on with formatting, just make sure everything is lined up and consistent. So especially with dates, I find that this can kind of slide under the radar, and it's not going to make or break your job experience, but if you definitely want to be careful and meticulous about your resume as far as if you're going to use dates, are you abbreviating it DEC.2020 for December, or are you saying 12/2020 for December, and keeping that type of abbreviation and formatting consistent throughout the entire document, so it's not a back and forth and it creates like this cognitive dissonance for the employer that really doesn't have to happen. So getting into the document itself, like I said, you start out with your name, your contact, and your name and your contact information is usually centered in the document. I have seen it right justified or left justified. And typically you want it aligned in the center. It does help it stand out more when you start listing out your experience and all of that is left justified. So I personally like it in the center. The next thing is sometimes we see objective statements, and this can be like a professional summary or there's a few different names for it. And honestly, it's optional. I never have those on my documents because it takes up a lot of space, and I'd rather use that extra space and a few lines to describe another experience I have and did, rather than just tell them in a paragraph form of what I want to do. Like, I think usually employers get a pretty good idea of what I want to do by looking at my resume because they see I have XYZ experience in a certain type of field that really shows that is my special interest. If you're going to a job fair, if you're applying for a job and the description isn't really specific enough to tell you, this is going to be more speech related, but like if you're applying to like a CF position and they haven't really described whether it's going to be more medical or more child and school based, but it's like through a company, you could put an objective statement to say what your interests are, or you can just organize the rest of your resume to put your interests first and then some of those like other experiences later. And this is going to be really up to you and how you feel confident in representing yourself. So the other sections, definitely the first section after your contact information, and if you decide to put an objective statement in there, is your education. Your education should always go first, and it's always chronological, so the most recent degree should be at the top, and then go down from there. As far as how you write your degree and whatnot, some people abbreviate like M.A. of speech language pathology, or some people actually write out Masters of Speech Language Pathology, and then the dates that you graduated and your school that you graduated from. Other sections that you'll typically have on a resume are honors and awards, certifications, technical skills, which I'll talk about in a second, and then presentations and conferences that you've attended or have actually presented. Technical skills and a skills section in general can really help you, but people, I think, get lost into this subsection of the resume, and oftentimes they'll just start throwing in soft skills like good communicator, good at managing schedules, whatever the case. And I'm not saying by any means that you're not good at those things, but from an employer's standpoint, you can talk great about yourself all day long, but show me the proof. Show me where you learned those skills. So those soft skills like communication skills and managing and all of that good stuff, your interpersonal skills, they should be kind of interwoven into your other experiences, even if you feel like it doesn't apply. So like if there's a research lab that you were a part of, but you really worked on that team, maybe you were a team leader in the research lab, or you had to collaborate a lot. I mean, collaboration, that's a huge buzzword that indicates, okay, you're probably good at working with people. And you don't have to directly say great at working with people. And you're saving space from that skill section to add more description onto your real experiences. In the skill section, though, I think it is still important to have one. You can put in your technical skills, so your Office, like your Microsoft Office skills, or if you are proficient in any types of coding and software that might be important for the field that you're going into. And sometimes jobs will even tell you, like, you might have to be good with PowerPoint presentation or Excel because that is a job requirement. So those are things you don't want to leave off, but you would add in that skill section. Okay, so it always pays off to have a person look over your resume at least 1 or 2 times, because especially in this next portion with your experiences, whether it be work or project experience or leadership experiences like volunteer work, a lot of these have overlap, especially if like you're like me, who was involved with clubs that had a lot to do with speech, language, and hearing, and I have a lot of leadership experience that's related to speech, language pathology. And a lot of my class projects were also related to speech language pathology. So there's a lot of overlap between my work experience, like my clinical experience, my project experience, my leadership experience. So it is important to really reflect on your entire life and your work experience and figure out, how does it relate to the job I'm applying to right now? What is important that they're going to need to know? So for speech language pathologists, I mean, public speaking is definitely important, but it's not what they want to see highlighted first. So what they might really want to see is your actual clinical experiences. And from the feedback I've gotten from speech language pathologists, most speech language pathologists prefer you writing your clinical experience chronologically. So I learned this the hard way because I divided it, personally, I had divided it between adult and child experience because I felt like they were very separated for me. And then within those sections, I had chronologically ordered from my most recent to my first experiences. But I remember one employer was like, oh, you know what? I was a little confused as to when each happened. So I would prefer to see what you've been doing now and just chronologically backwards from there rather than split between an adult and a child section. But then I had another employer tell me that they liked the way that I divided it. So sometimes there really is a lot of subjectivity. It depends on the person. Sometimes it depends on the person's mood even. Like that one person I had just talked about, she had totally forgotten we had an interview together and pulled up my resume right there on the spot. And I think that might have contributed to why she was confused. I'm not really sure. It's not my place to judge, but it does depend person to person. So don't feel personally attacked if someone didn't like your resume or found it confusing. Just take that information and work forward from there and say, you know what, actually, I do see how having those 2 sections divided could be confusing. So I changed it for the next time. And, it's been working out since. Getting even deeper into the experiences sections, how you want to describe your experiences, this is where you're going to be tailoring things a lot. And, maybe not a lot, depending if you're applying to more of the same job. But if you're applying to different parts of the field, you do want to be aware of how you're wording things. I like to do what I call like matching languages. So I'll look at the job description, look for keywords. I might even highlight them or underline them or just copy and paste them and put them in a separate document or in a notes tab, because when I'm applying to a job, I want to be able to adapt my language to theirs so that it's seamless. So if I notice that they're using certain words like manage, collaborate, communicate, lead, facilitate, those are words that I want to be dropping in my resume. And you have to be careful not to use words too often. Some of the most overused words are used, utilized, worked. That is a huge one, worked. I see that almost all the time. I would suggest using a thesaurus to change up your vocabulary words, especially because sometimes I'm just brain dead. I'm doing like some of this editing at the end of the day after I had a really long, stressful day. The last thing I want to do is like come up with all of these synonyms in my mind. And what really helps me do that is just using a thesaurus and looking up other words for started. Like if I started like a project on my own, I might use facilitate or created or discovered or found or whatever the case is, depending on the experience. But also, I notice when you use some of those stronger vocabulary words that are richer in context, it helps describe exactly what you did a lot better. I think a lot of times people undersell themselves on the resume because they're not giving enough description, they're not using strong enough vocabulary, and they're not reflecting enough on the experiences themselves. So when I say quantify their experiences, I mean, you can add in some numbers and some details. If you did child language screenings in the schools, you can say pre-K versus kindergarten. And then you can say, how many schools did you go to? How many different types of screening assessments did you learn and implement or utilize? How many children would you see total? Maybe you saw a total of 50 to 100 in that span of a couple of months. It really helps the employer too to get a better idea of what is your experience. It can help them prepare for the interview process, and they might ask you more details about a certain thing because you mentioned some of those details. Or it might help reassure them that you have the competency they're looking for, because a lot of people can say screened preschool and kindergarten aged students during fall semester, blah, blah, blah. And one person who wrote that on their resume might have seen 5 kids during that semester, whereas you might have worked your tail off, getting extra hours, going every single week, seeing 10 kids every week. So you have, I don't know, like 60 kids that you saw. And I mean, the competency level could vary a lot, but no one would know that just given that very vague, generic type of description. And I'm not saying that like everyone does this and kind of undersells himself, but it's really easy to undersell yourself and undermine all the really hard work you've been doing if you don't add in some of that description and detail and quantifying your experiences a little bit better. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, the way you write your sentences in your descriptions are also very important. So most times you will, for a resume, you will never have a paragraph type of description. You will always have bullet points for a resume. So you always want to start after that bullet point with an action word, because that bullet point stands for the word I. So you'll always start your description statements with an action word. Led, facilitated, implemented. It helps with like saving space, and it gets right to the point. Like, it's very action and goal oriented when you start with the action words and then you go right into that very detailed descriptive type of statement that you would be writing for each of your experiences. So in general, just with resumes, make sure that you're going through everything thoroughly, check through it more than once, have a couple other people check through it. If you have a professional that you trust in your field to look over it, I would definitely suggest doing that. Like if they're close to you, like a professor, it's definitely a good idea to get another set of eyes on your papers in your documents, but also so that they can help guide you with some more of those specifics that you might be missing, because like I said, this is very generic, general advice. And along with that concept of not underselling yourself, do not lie on your resume. This should be kind of a given, but I mean, I will never forget this time I had a student, and he wasn't a speech language pathology student, thank the Lord. He was a engineering student, and I was like, wow, I was blown away by all of these great experiences he had on his resume, and I'm there to help provide him with more support for his resume. So I start asking him questions, and I noticed like there's some blank stares and there's some gaps in his stories that he's telling me. And I have to be respectful. I can't assume that he lied. I had told him, I'm a little confused. I feel like there's some things on your resume that are contradicting from what you're telling me here in person. And that's when he broke down. He was like, yeah, I lied, but no one's going to notice if I lie about, this thing, because I do know about it. I just didn't do it. And I was like, are you kidding me? Because sure, maybe you have those skills, but if you lie about an experience on your resume, you have broken the trust between you and the employer. And you've wasted your time, you've wasted their time, and all around, it's just not fun. And I feel like, in a way, you're selling yourself short too, because you're not recognizing all of the hard work you've been putting into your classes and into whatever you've been doing on the side for community work or socialization. Like if you feel like you need to over-exaggerate or lie on your paperwork, maybe that's a signal that you're not reflecting enough on the experiences you already have, or that you could potentially join or do something more that would help advance you more in your field. Like maybe join another club, or look for some courses that you can take online. There's a ton of free stuff on the internet now, so there's no reason to not be working towards your field and your goals constantly. But also make sure that you feel confident in what you are showing the employer, because they're going to ask you questions about what's on your paperwork. They might even take a small little snippet of what you do and ask about it. Like when I had my interview for the head and neck oncology unit, one of the first questions I got was, oh, you're from the North Country. And I was like, wait, how did you know? And they said, oh, we saw that you like do stuff in upstate New York and like the Thousand Islands area, whatever. And I was like, oh, so they really do check. I mean, it was a pleasant surprise because it meant that they really took the time and looked through my entire document, and I felt validated in that sense, because like I said, sometimes there's employers who just don't really check. So you want to make sure that you're putting your best self out there. This is a summary of a representation of your work. And don't be too discouraged if you do get comments back on your resume. It means that you can only improve it from there. And it actually really does help having some feedback on resumes sometimes. Like I said, it worked out well for me, and resume culture and how we view resumes might even change in the future. So just because we're doing it one way now doesn't mean that 5-10 years from now we might be switching it up on our resumes, and we might add colors. That would be fun, right? Because I am tired of writing everything in black and white. I'm tired of looking at resumes in black and white, but for now, that is what is socially accepted in our environment. So that is what we do until otherwise. But I hope you at least took something out of this. And if you have any questions, of course, drop them down below in the comment section. Please subscribe to join the Franny Pack. And there will be another video uploaded next Friday at 1 p.m. Thank you, everyone.